Well, welcome back to our latest Regcast. Today we're talking about business information for real people. You're real people, we've got information, we're the business. Couldn't be more perfect, could it? And joining us today to talk about this, from Microsoft, we have Will Thompson. Will, welcome to the studio. It's your first time in here, isn't it? Great. Now, Will, why are you here? What do you do that involves business information?
Well, I'm a technical specialist at Microsoft, and I look after business intelligence. So I spend a lot of time with our customers talking about what our technology can do for them, how business intelligence can be enabled within their businesses.
Who do you end up talking to then?
So most of the time, I guess I'm talking to IT directors, IT architects, but also people in the business. And that's really one of the critical things. When we can get them in the room together, we get a lot more success.
OK, fair enough. We'll find out more about that later. And from our old mates, Freeform Dynamics, Martin Atherton. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Tim. How are you?
Welcome back. I'm very well, thank you very much.
Cool.
And business information, this is something Freeform Dynamics has been doing a lot about recently, isn't it?
Yeah, we've been looking at this for quite some time, and there are a lot of consistent messages that we're getting back, which we'll go into shortly. But I'm glad we acknowledged the types of people that Will talks to, because we talk about that a lot. You know, it's easy to wave your arms and say that the IT department needs to talk to business more, and business needs to talk to IT more. It actually turns out that although that is kind of a given and it's a bit obvious, it doesn't always happen, because the business guys have got their jobs to do and the IT guys have got their jobs to do. And often it requires, if you remember the last webcast, we talked about this exact same thing. It often requires a little bit of external influence or inspiration, or simply just someone coming to see you, and you get those two parties in the room. So however it happens, it's a good thing, but we have to remember that it is what we're trying to achieve, but it doesn't always happen by magic or by accident.
You see, usually when we're in here with your colleague, John Collins, and he's always saying, you know, the business has got to talk to the IT. Oh, he goes on and on. Oh, hang on, what's this? Look, it's tiny John Collins. Come on, it looks like him, doesn't it?
It does a little bit.
It does look exactly like him.
That.
Why are you here today, John? You're very interested in business information. Do you think Martin will do a good job? He's not so sure. What have you got for us here? Oh, look, he's got an extra little PowerPoint slide for us. There you go. You give
Thanks.
that.
I'll refer to that in a moment.
You're going to stay. You're going to stay for the Regcast. Good. We'll do it on the floor then. Right. OK, well, that's enough of that. First of all, I've just got to explain the interface very quickly for you. If you've attended one of these before, you know what it is. It's the buttons that are just up there. The most important one is ask a question. Please do ask a question. If you wait until the end and then you ask them, we haven't got time for them. So the minute something comes into your head, ask a question, put your name on it. It's more polite. You can get bios of the speakers today. You can download a PDF of the file of the presentation. It doesn't have tiny John Collins' little extra slide on it. It's got, and please do that. Keep that for later. Show it to your mates. And finally, at the end of it, give us your feedback. We do more of what you want at the Reg. We don't ignore you and just carry on doing the same old thing forever. We do actually listen to what you say. Right, let's crack on with this, Martin. Why are we talking about business information sort of right now? These sort of, this sort of big ticket, big project sort of stuff.
Well, actually, that's what we're going to sort of acknowledge that we're not talking about. And I didn't want to interrupt your flow earlier. BI stands for business intelligence.
Business intelligence. Oh.
And however, I think the way you've sort of hijacked that acronym is actually quite good, because it doesn't really fit the kind of things that we're going to be talking about, and we think the things that are important to the business and the IT sort of leaders and obviously the people doing it at the coalface going forward. So that was actually quite a good.
I'm going to pretend I did it on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did that on purpose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So information delivery, business intelligence for real people. I kind of hope that speaks for itself, but hopefully by the end of this, there'll be a few pointers in terms of, OK, that's an interesting way to think about some important things for the business, and hopefully some pointers as to maybe actually go and do something practical about it. So in terms of the topics that I'm proposing that we work through for the next hour or so. Bit of background on the workshop. This is obviously, I think this is webcast number 3 in a series of 4 that we're doing. We've talked about high availability of systems. We've talked about managing your stuff and getting into a position where you can make the right decisions about managing your stuff going forward. That was the other week. we're going to touch upon the thing that we're not talking about, but we need some context as to what we sort of used to mean by business intelligence and why that doesn't really fit the sort of the important things and the things that matter to businesses and IT going forwards. And then we'll introduce what we mean by today's BI, and then maybe we can just stop talking about B and I as an acronym and keep having to say it's not this, it's this, and maybe we could just drop that and come up with something more useful instead. But the big question there then is sort of, well, that's all very interesting, but so what? And we'll talk about what that means from hopefully some practical points of view. And then we'll talk about, well, OK, so great, what might we do about this, given that hopefully we've gone from here to here and it's important
people are going to be able to go away from this with the idea that they can do something.
Yeah, hopefully. But I want to be dead clear about this, that this is quite a big, messy topic, and part of the challenge, if you like, or part of the important thing that we want people to sort of go away with is just a different way of thinking about exploiting information in the business. And that in itself actually sets up, OK, well, if we're thinking in this way, then these are the things that are going to matter to us, and these are the things that are important. These are the things that we might be able to do. So it's a bit of a mindset shift from IT's point of view and from business's point of view. But we'll get to that, and then we're going to wrap up with some practical, or hopefully practical, top tips that we've uncovered on our mutual travels.
OK, great. So, I mean, that's kind of like, this comes out of the workshops that you've been doing with the reg. So you've got information from where the reg is in this. What are the people that are watching this today? What sort of stage are you finding that reg readers are at, thinking about this?
Well, it sort of depends what you ask them, really. Yeah. I mean, I've got funnily enough, I did bring one chart today, and we'll get onto that. But if you ask them about how traditional BI, and we'll get to what we think that means in a minute, is serving the needs of the business for things like high-level business review and planning, or delivery of information analysis for sort of periodic operational review and planning and that kind of thing, actually people are generally quite happy. But if you switch focus and say, well, what about the information the availability of relevant information for kind of more on-the-fly operational decision-making during, at the coalface, if you like, or at the point where processes are happening, where people are doing things, and if you like, the proactive delivery of information, alerts and things like that to relevant people at certain places on certain devices and all that kind of stuff when things happen, and usually what. By that we mean sort of exceptions and things like that. You find that actually, you know what, needs are not being met at all. So that's a bit of a baseline, if you like, between what we used to talk about as business intelligence and what we are talking about. But we've kind of jumped ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
So this is what we're not talking about. Business intelligence traditionally over the last sort of 10, 15 years has kind of meant big software projects, lump all your stuff in one place and run lots of reports on it. And that's often meant looking backwards, taking a retrospective view of what's happened, gather the data, put it in one place, clean it up, make sense of it, and give the CEO or the CFO or whatever a report that tells them how they did over the last quarter or whatever.
From this point of view, this is the sort of thing that people have called in big IT consultancies to do and stuff like that. They wouldn't have called in Microsoft at this time.
They have done in the past. There's been a very big shift in the way that people, as Martin says, there's been a big shift in the way that people think about BI in the past. It's been getting data warehouses put in, getting very large processes put in where there's reports flying around everywhere, but things that take time to produce. And I think that's where we're thinking about it, sort of having your data all in one place. Might not necessarily be the best way of approaching it, though.
I suppose one of the problems is you've got so much data in one place that just handling that data becomes a huge project.
Yeah, the actual consumption of that data is very difficult. It's typically sat in a format that people can't easily get access to. It needs to go through the report writers, the report developers. That introduces latency. It also means that the people who are responsible for creating those reports are really stressed in terms of the volume of work that they're being asked to do. We want to try and free up some of their time to focus on more useful things like the high availability and
And I notice also you've got here on this the serving the needs of the few, the idea that it's something to provide information for management. Is that still the case, business intelligence? Martin?
I think I'm going to possibly risk getting shouted at here, but yes, in terms of how we have thought about BI systems and solutions, then yes. I would say some vendors are making a better fist of others at what we've been calling this sort of democratization of business intelligence, and that's more about spreading the goodness, if you like, and making sense of things for people making decisions in real time, or as close to real time as you can get, as opposed to, can I have a report on what happened in the last quarter, please? There's a fundamental difference there in terms of what you're using information for, and that has a lot of implications about what you do with it and how you send it to places and what format you put it in and how you surface it and where you surface it and all that kind of stuff. But we'll get to that.
The other problem with that reporting for management is that those guys who are sitting at the top of the business, they get their report, they see their numbers, they think, OK, we need to do something about that. They're not the ones who are empowered to make a change in the business. They can tell people to go and change their behaviours, but by the time it's trickled down through all the levels of management to the guys on the floor, that could take time. And it's getting that information to those people, the people who can quickly, say, spot a value that's out of kilter, spot a KPI that's gone red, make a change quickly, because they're the ones who are responsible for it, and therefore make some improvement.
So rather than gathering the information, sending it up, and then waiting for it to come back down again, it's much more of a side-to-side thing, if you can make that information make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite I hope you agree that it's quite a fundamental difference in terms of what we used to call BI and how we really should be thinking about it. And we think there's a bit of a problem because we still see lots of reports about BI and there's a lot of money spent on that kind of software and things like that. But I think today, if you go and ask a CIO or a business guy about business intelligence, he's going to put a whole bunch of different things in there, not just, it's that big system that we generate reports from. He's going to be thinking about, information management and delivery and architecture and process and workflow and all the things that we can think about using to get information to the people that need it when they need it. If that's what you mean by that, then yeah, we're spending money on that. And then that gets translated back to people spending loads of money on BI, which people think, that's the big system thing. So there's a bit of a sort of a messed up loop going on there.
So do you think that some of these reports that come out saying about how big the BI market is don't really represent the activity
we think that it doesn't represent what people understand to be the important things. And hey, we could have got that completely wrong. I don't think we have, but we could have got that completely wrong. And there's going to be some, a load of BI sales guys out there very happy with their targets and their bonuses. But I'm not sure that's the case. And we think the conversation has moved on if the sort of the perception of the acronym hasn't. But hey, what's in a name, right? I mean, that's kind of, you've already...
Well, that's how you make your money.
A little bit, but you've already said BI, business information. Well, hey, why not? That's kind of what we're talking about. So there's a different vision emerging, and I actually I took the liberty of stealing a paragraph from a short book we've just written, so I thought I might as well use it, because we spent quite a long time
You're allowed one plug if you just had it.
Okay, well, I didn't say the title, did I? But what we're talking about now is ultimately about supporting frontline decision making, and that's the sort of the support of timely, I'm reading this now, the support of timely operational decision making across the business as a whole, achieved through alerting of frontline personnel to events and exceptions, and the provision of relevant, complete, up-to-date, actionable information, to the frontline at the appropriate level in the appropriate form for a given business process.
Can you explain that a little bit? Just a little bit shorter.
Yeah, sure. It's about getting the right information to the right people at the right time in the right format. And
here is, I'm going to put this to you, Will. There's a lot of people who'll be watching this, who'll be saying, this is what we do all day anyway. We're already doing this. All you're doing is just rebranding the day-to-day applications as business intelligence. Isn't it a bit of a sort of sleight of hand that you're doing here?
I think, when you think about how people use applications versus how people use business intelligence, if I can use that as a big umbrella term. I think when people think about doing BI, they think about those reports, whereas when they think about doing the applications, they think about the process. And there's always a disconnect there. It's if you can get that information that tells you how your business is performing, what you can do to improve it, embedded within an application or within the process that you use, there's a lot more value in it there. rather than saying, OK, I'm going to use my application and I get the data out of my application, but if I want to go and get an overview picture, I've got to go to my BI.
Think about it this way, and there's an ERP analogy, or not even an analogy, and a good example actually of how that has helped. There's a guy in a department here, there's a lady in a department here, there's another guy here, another lady here, and everyone's doing their own thing, and they may or may not have their own particular application that helps them do particular elements of their job, and that is connected to some information somewhere else, which may or may not be shared with other applications that other people are using. However, businesses don't run like that. Individual jobs work like that because people generally, the majority of people doing jobs in the world generally do the same things over and over again. However, processes run across departments and essentially, think of, I don't know, but a really obvious example is when you make something, right? You buy some raw materials, you do a whole bunch of stuff to them, you ship them off and you sell them, right? So that runs from one end of the business right through to the other. And there are lots and lots of processes of businesses that do that. And therefore, when something doesn't work properly or something breaks, it isn't always the information that you're working with at the time that you need to actually make a change or fix it. And hence what we're talking about are, as well as people in offices on applications, people that aren't actually in the office and maybe have a mobile device or maybe are asked a question by a client, or where's this, or where's that, or why haven't you done this, or why is the customer service so rubbish? And those sorts of things are not addressed by off-the-shelf or even custom-made applications, because it's stuff that just happens. There isn't an application for every eventuality that could ever exist in business. It just doesn't work like that. Now, ERP has gone a very long way, when it's done properly, to linking up quite a lot of the common processes, such as procure to pay and purchase orders and salary and runs and HR processes, things like that, which do not require any changes or inconsistencies. And you don't need 5 different ways to process an invoice and all that kind of stuff. You need one consistent way because it makes sense. So there's a whole bunch of things encapsulated in ERP and other types of software, which great, sorted, but it's those are not the things that you do to change the direction of your business or make it better or frankly screw it up. It's the things that happen around that. And it's sometimes it's the same information, but sometimes it's not. But the bottom line is, often, we've talked about this outside, you don't even know what the question is before you get asked it.
That's the difference, I think, again, between, or maybe another way of thinking about the difference between applications and BI.
In your answer to this, can you tie it back to the real world? Because I'm struggling to understand, actually. I'm struggling to understand what these unknown questions might be, for example.
So, if you think about, you want to know, OK, I've got a set of business processes. Let's take our manufacturing example again. I did some work with a car manufacturer a little while ago. The way that they currently do their monitoring of how their business is performing, everything from raw materials coming in, production of cars, shipping it out to the forecourts and then selling them on, all done by paper spreadsheets they print out from Excel, stick them on a wall. That's a really poor way of doing that process, because it takes so much time, so much effort to get all that stuff together. What you should be able to do is say, OK, across all of those different processes, if we can bring that data together and get something that's live, up to date, not something that has to be manually entered into a spreadsheet and printed out and posted on a wall, you should be able to have a much more close real-time view of what's going on across all those different processes. And that's, I think, where we're trying to move away, trying to get to, rather than things sitting in applications that might be different application for each part of the process.
And are we talking here about a specific project? When you go in to people, is it because they want to launch a BI project that's going to last a certain number of months and involve a certain number of things?
It can do. People think of, sometimes people say, I want some BI. BI sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
But that's very rarely the case. People don't think, I need a BI project. They think, I need something that fixes this problem that I've got. Now, if the thing that fixes that problem happens to be some BI solution, which involves some dashboards or some workflow or whatever it might be, then so be it. But quite often, they'll just think of it as how can I fix this business problem? And that's where, looking at, OK, well, where does the embedded Where do we embed this information into the process?
And without saying it depends, I always nag people about this, but without saying it depends, there's a question here from Clive Kirk, who's saying, how long, what sort of resources is this going to take? How long is it going to take?
Something simple might only be a couple of weeks. Something to get something very quick, a pilot off the ground. To say, let's look at all that data. Let's go back to the manufacturing example I had. Let's get all that data together, stick into some live spreadsheets or some live dashboards. It could only be a couple of weeks to do that. Now, if you're looking at something that's maybe a really complex process, which is core to your business, let's say in banking, I've done work with people where they've been client onboarding, they've got to go through, or mortgage application processing, that sort of thing, where you've got to go through a whole range of processes. That can take longer. That could be a few months with a number of developers working on it. But you can get started very quickly.
Depends what it is, and this is kind of the whole point. We've got some examples that we're going to talk about in a while. I mean, I'm saving my one for the moment, but it does depend on what it is, and what we're not advocating is right then we are going to nail the information management and delivery in this organisation, because that's a hiding to nothing. You're not going to get buy-in for.
It's too big a.
Yeah.
It's too big a mouthful.
Absolutely. So it's about deciding what particular either role or group of people, or probably more specifically than that, a particular thing that is a constant bugbear that you can go and find out about, and somebody will say, you know what, if I had this within half an hour of it happening, I could do something about that, instead of reading about it in a report 2 weeks later, when I can't do anything about it other than tell you it happened and then you shout at me.
Okay.
So I think the conversation about what this thing is and the requirement for sort of doing more with our information has definitely moved on. And I know you're a little bit sceptical, but are you starting to... Are we expressing ourselves clearly? Because if we're not, then we should probably try again.
Well, I mean, that's a question I have to pass on. Are they expressing themselves clearly? Because if they're not, then, then I will verbally beat them up. Not really.
Well, it's those guys that matter. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, that sort of thing. If there's stuff that's not being answered, then let us know. But, yeah, what I'm really interested... I mean, always what I'm interested to find out is what we're talking about doing differently now than if we'd have been doing this 2 years ago.
2 years ago... probably need to go a little bit further back than that, but because we've been talking about this for a while, and it is one of those things that is never going to be completely and utterly nailed. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's so important to work out the important things to start addressing, rather than trying to just get your arms around the whole thing. Ultimately, what we're talking about is how you go about embedding information access into what people do every day. Mm-hmm. And that is a lot different from saying all the information is over there, but you can't have it because you're not at sea level. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty fundamental...
It's also an organisational change to do that, though, isn't there? There's a level of trust involved.
There's been a change, and I guess that's something else that if you think back 5 years or whatever, there might be that change now, where people are starting to say, well, actually, there has to be some trust between IT and between the business, both in terms of the way that people consume data, the way that people publish data across those two departments, but also the reliability of that information, the timeliness of that information, these things that we talked about, being the right format at the right time, etc., etc. IT can only go so far in publishing information. There has to be trust from the other side as well to say, this number that you're giving me, how many widgets we've made or whatever it is, I believe you because I know where that data's come from, etc.
Which is slightly ironic, given it came from the data from the business in the first place, right? And it's kind of like it's shooting the messenger mentality. But I think you're right. There are some implications for IT. The biggest one is that it can't and shouldn't begin to assume it knows the areas in which we should be thinking about this stuff, because that's not for IT to say, and it shouldn't even be their burden to try and second guess which types of people or which locations or which types of jobs or which business processes are not currently served with appropriate information at the time that people need to make decisions. That's not down to IT to second guess. That's a recipe for a never-ending project, which you're just not going to get off the ground.
Okay, we've got immediate feedback on this, because there are several requests, and I actually want to hear more from you, Will, on this, about some real world problems that you've solved, I mean, at a level of not generally they needed to do this, but this is what we put together and this is what they could see on the screen, for example?
Sure, OK. So worked with a very large consumer packaged goods company. They were looking at getting information across their suppliers, across all of their different suppliers for a certain product. Now, they needed to understand what they were paying them, what the different invoices were that were available against each of these suppliers, what the different products they went into were, so they could see, OK, what's coming in from these suppliers, what are we doing, and where is that those components ending up in terms of the product. So they had high-level dashboard, just a web page for somebody to go to, but it had information from the invoicing system, so it had each individual invoice with a link to go and get a report to go and actually see what was on that invoice. They had a process diagram to see, OK, which stage and how many items or components, whatever it was within each of those stages. And they also, and that's, I think it's another thing that's quite important, is against each of these things, they had who's responsible for it. So that somebody who was looking at this information, trying to make some sort of informed decision about what should we do to improve one of these figures.
Who's looking at that dashboard?
Somebody to go and talk to it. They've got it's actually available for everybody to see. So the people who are responsible for actually that relationship with those suppliers and actually getting the stuff to and from where it needs to be can go and see it. So they can track their own individual stuff. But they're also, the managers of those, so the people who are responsible for the product managers, so they look at it from one side, but also supplier managers from the other. They've all got access to it, so they can all work from those same numbers, all accountable for it.
But IT wouldn't get up one day and go into the office and go, aha, I know what would be really useful for those guys over there. This.
Very important, yeah. It's about, that problem didn't arise until they were in the same room talking about it. Now, in that case, it took somebody from an external party in case...
You're a kind of marriage broker.
Exactly, yeah, sort of brokering the conversation a little bit to say, OK, what problems have you got? What technology and services can you provide, and how can we sort of marry them together?
And what information, what applications are they using? What technology are you providing that makes this happen?
So Microsoft provides things like SharePoint from a portal point of view.
So SharePoint to create the web page.
That's the actual web page.
Yeah.
Then the content within it might be things like reports from SQL Server. They might be using some of the other technologies within SQL Server to actually go out and query all those other systems and bring that information together. The other part of it, of course, is that all of that information, once it's there ready to be displayed in a dashboard, people can use Excel to report on that information. Although that information is being published as a sort of central, in a common place for everybody to go for all of that information, they can just use something simple like Excel to report on it.
Why would I want to report on it if it's already...
What if it's not exactly how I want it displayed? I've got that information about the invoices and about the process, but maybe... Like we said, you don't always know exactly what the question's going to be. You've got to provide people with the analysis tools to go and cut it in exactly the way they want to do it.
Then there's the question of access. And simply by not having to go to 3 separate systems, you're already a long way ahead of where you would have been when you've got a guy on the phone going, where's my stuff? And if you're accessing a single web page with the components of information that you can pull together and answer that particular question, which may be slightly different than the one you got asked an hour ago, but it's the same underlying data that you're using to actually be helpful to the customer. That's a lot different from having to go to 3 places and try and work it out manually, or telling them, we can tell you in at the end of the quarter when we've run our reports, and we can work out that we actually lost 10 boxes of whatever, and there you go. So it's quite a fundamental difference. So I think the implications for IT are pretty positive, actually. I hope so, anyway, because the talking and finding out bit hopefully means that you end up doing less stuff that doesn't matter, or less stuff that sounded like a good idea or felt like a good idea, but really didn't matter. And you focus on the things that do matter. I mean, ultimately, this is going to sound dead cheesy, but it's the I in IT that is actually the really important bit. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is that acknowledgement from a technology point of view. Let's not kid ourselves, right? Information has always been very important in business, no kidding, right? But we've always talked about all this infrastructure and technology that we've got and overlaying the importance of information on top of it, when really it should be the other way around. We've got all this information we want to do more with. How can our IT help and enable that. So it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about it.
In IT, is there someone in IT who has to be the gatekeeper for the quality of this information? There's a couple of comments talking about how information is data in context. And you can provide something, a portal that's going to pop up any old numbers, but we need someone who's going to be the referee of the quality of those numbers. Is that an IT function?
I think, we talk about data stewards, or that's often a common title that's given to those people. Now, as to whether it sits in IT or whether it sits in the business, I think somebody in the business, they're going to be the people who actually understand what the numbers mean. They can provide the context. But somebody in IT is probably the one who's providing the number, as in the actual, what do I connect to get that bit of data.
But someone needs to take this responsibility. It's a very important part of the process, because without it the process will fail if there is not confidence that the information that's being delivered is intelligent.
That's why you want to start saying, okay, well, what service can we provide as IT? I want to be the person who's responsible for providing the service, but let the business manage actually what that information means.
Some of that context does fall to IT, because you want to give something. You want to give somebody something that means something, right? And that is going to be based on what their job is, obviously, where they are, possibly even what device they're accessing it from. So there are some, if you like, baseline sort of, contextual drivers that actually it is IT's job to understand and get right. But you still can't do that on your own. You're not going to second guess all that, particularly if you're trying to work out, those sort of three things. And where do we start? Which people or which processes or whatever. So it does come back to it's a joint thing. And if that means that you've got to get someone external in to just kick that process off, then so be it. If otherwise it's not going to happen.
It needn't necessarily be an 18-month. You're not going to have them hanging around charging $1,000 a day.
Certainly, yeah.
Ever.
Well, you might end up doing that, but that's not where you start from. You would start from there if you thought, actually, we're going to just do everything all at once, and it's going to be a lot of consultants for a lot of time, and nobody does that anymore, or at least we don't think so.
Well, I mean, this
mainstream.
does slightly lead on to the fact that if Will, for example, was working for Oracle, you'd be sitting here talking about what you need is a big database and a single source of truth. We've moved around that one a little bit, because we're saying we're sort of assuming that the data exists and is accessible already. Is this a fair assumption to make, Will, in your experience?
I think a lot of it will do. And I think with the best will in the world, you will never get every single bit of data in your organisation into a data warehouse. Mm-hmm. There is always going to be somebody using Excel or Access to create a little application somewhere. There's a great story that there's a guy called Donald Farmer at Microsoft. He works out of our corporate headquarters. He always tells this story about he went into a customer, major airline in the US. He's presenting to their CIO, and somebody rushes into the room after a couple of minutes and says, "Oh no, there's been a real major problem. We've had one of our applications has fallen over. It's the one that checks all the baggage in and out of, as they get loaded onto the planes." The CIO says, "Donald, I'm really sorry. We're going to have to stop the meeting. Give me an hour. Let me go sort this out, and I'll come back." Sure enough, comes back about an hour later, and he says, "It's a real major problem because, we can't get any bags onto or off of the planes because we can't check them off through this application." You know what the biggest problem is, though? Didn't even know that application existed until an hour ago. Yeah. The reason being, somebody's gone away because that data wasn't in a data warehouse, and they've created that application using Excel, using Access, something like that. Now, I think one of the things with the world of BI today, we should be acknowledging that not everything's going to be there, and giving people tools to say, okay, well, let's go and get some of the data from our data warehouse. Somebody in the business should be able to say, I know you've provided me some of this data, but there's also some other data that I want to mash up with that information. Maybe I've got it from online or from another system, whatever it is. But there has to be another side to that. I can produce something in Excel, I can produce a little model, allow people to start using it, but rather than running on a desktop under somebody's desk, why not publish that somewhere like a SharePoint site where IT can manage it, and IT can track that application. I know how many people are using it, who's using it, when they're using it. There has to be this, again, it's trust, I guess, between IT publishing that data, but trusting the business to make use of it and giving them the tools to allow them to do what they need with it, rather than just what IT provide them.
You're right to call out the big database and the Oracle thing and all that, because what this is not about is kicking older or traditional BI and saying that it doesn't work and it's not any good and all that kind of stuff. That is absolutely not what we're saying.
There was a bit of discrete kicking went on earlier.
Well, it's not so much that it's not good and it doesn't work, it's that we're talking about a different set of priorities that are not served by the traditional way of looking at this thing that we're calling BI. That's actually a good place to start, though, because a lot of organisations, particularly of a certain size, will have gone through an exercise of putting things in one place, cleaning it up, trying to be consistent about it, trying to be careful with it, trying to be secure with it, and all that kind of stuff. What we're talking about is delivering, whether it's that information or whether it's, quite a lot of that information and other bits of information, to the people that need it when they need it. So it's a different conversation. It's not black or white. It's not this isn't good or bad and this doesn't work. It's just that the requirements and the discussion, if you like, have sort of moved on a little bit.
Well, that leads to a question I got here from Kaz, who's asking about, in your estimation, how widespread is the adoption, either of what we're talking about today at the moment, or of those bigger projects that would sit behind it, the way that people have managed to clean up their information. How successful has that been?
How successful?
How successful? That's the first one, yeah. I've got a follow-up question.
OK, so how widespread? Quite widespread in terms of organisations, acknowledging that this is the thing that they really should be, or that is important to address. Mm-hmm. And then we're seeing lots of sort of small things happening. Now, the important thing, or the interesting thing to note, is that it's relatively early days for thinking in this fashion about exploiting information. Don't get me wrong, like I said, we've been talking about exploiting information in our businesses forever. The point is, we haven't been doing it as well as we could have been with technology. So it's about rethinking how we do that with technology, and that's what we're trying to talk about now. So we know from the work that we did with the Reg, I think, a couple of years back, around information governance, which is taking a top-down view on this and getting organised to be able to do it. The leaders are not very far ahead of the laggards, and the leaders are at the stage where they have some degree of, or a better degree of control around things like security and access. And so when something is removed or put in there that shouldn't be, somebody gets an alert somewhere. So it's pretty early days. In terms of getting all that goodness out into the field where it's required, that's still a bit of a, if you like, a siloed
I'll put this
activity.
to Will.
Early days, there we go. That's a bit of a waffly answer.
I'll get something from Will, from the point of view when you go in to deal with these customers then. How can you tell, and so, how can the people who are watching this sort of self-diagnose whether you're a leader or a laggard, whether you've got a lot of getting fit to do before you start doing these sort of SharePoint-type things that you're talking about?
Well, one of the first things that people, the first questions is, have you got a data warehouse? Mm-hmm. People will sometimes turn around and go, yeah, we've got a data warehouse, it's rubbish. Why is it rubbish? Now, there can be a multitude of reasons, but rubbish and rubbish out is a classic one. People haven't spent the time saying, okay, what is the data, understanding what it shows and how to get it into that data warehouse. That's one of the first things to start talking about. And that's the old big BI bit, putting it all into one place. Looking at, okay, well, how do we move that conversation into how are people making best use of information? How do people access that information that's in the data warehouse? But also, how can they access data that's elsewhere? What tools are available for them to do that? Do you provide either self-service reporting tools to go and connect that information and write the reports the way you want them? Do you provide any tools to actually federate data from different sources into Excel or something like that? For people out in the business to go and do that. That's the other sort of question you ask. What tools are available for people?
You've kind of started describing the elements which make up a little what do you call those things where you've got circles overlapping?
Venn diagram.
Venn diagrams. We love those things. Got a little Venn diagram here, which I should have put in the slide.
I was about to point that out, actually. It's television for you. He's got it on a piece of paper on his desk. He's going to describe it. Yeah.
But I hope this actually articulates some of the underlying things that are important in all this, because we're not talking about buying a whole bunch of software and lobbing it somewhere. This is more about an approach, using things that a lot of organisations have already got in various bits and places. So we'll start off talking about, if you like, classic information management things, and that being consistent, maybe. Master data management is an exercise that organisations have as an ongoing thing to try and clean things up and have single version of the truth and all that kind of stuff. Organisations are obviously already doing things like storage, and they're already doing things like business intelligence from where it's come from, sort of kind of thing. But then there's two other areas that we think dovetail into that data view, because that's quite a sort of a one-dimensional thing. It's a very important one, though. The other angle is taking a process view, and that's about from here to here and putting some context around it. And that's around sort of understanding what the processes are, maybe modelling or remodelling some process, and maybe having some rules in place so that if this thing happens here, this guy gets told about it over here. And that's about rules and about sort of orchestration and workflow management and that kind of thing. Again, things that a lot of organisations already have the capabilities to do. And then there's the sort of the third view, which is taking a service view of this. And if you think about, well, actually, if we think about this in terms of a service, so when something happens here, this guy finds out about it, and this little widget sends that thing from there to there, you can see that as a service. And we can, if we're going to try and align what IT is doing with the business, we can understand what services are going to be most highest priority or most important to look at. We can do some modelling, and the most important thing is reusing those things. So taking a consistent approach and doing things in the same way each time you address one of these priorities.
That's the problem with this very often, isn't it? The business changes around you whilst you're putting these processes in place.
Yeah. And that's another reason why those 18-month projects typically start to suffer, because by the time you reach the end of it, the business requirements have changed.
You're modelling the wrong business.
You're modelling the wrong thing. So again, if the business have the tools to do it themselves, to consume these services, compose their BI applications, whatever you will, from all those different components, they can be a bit more agile about it.
And that bit in the middle,
there you go.
The bit in the middle is a sweet spot, and that is where you're going to impact frontline decision making. So you could put FLDN there if you want.
FLDN, all right. You can put this. I hope you're doing this chart at home for yourselves. FLDN. There we are with an arrow to it. Yeah, but there we go.
M doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Decision making.
Making up acronyms. That's terrible, isn't it? We don't need. We don't need any more of those.
You've got a Microsoft person in there, and there has to be some acronyms.
Honestly, someone ought to make some sort of presentation software that we can use for this sort of thing.
But this is why we're talking about an approach.
Yeah.
A different way of thinking about things, as opposed to there's an application for this, because there isn't.
OK, but in the last 15 minutes, what we do need to do is to produce some sort of practical step-by-step for people so that we can, know where to start, because and there's definitely a few people wanting that.
Well, funnily enough, the next slide we've got is called How. And given everything that we've said, that we've actually alluded to a little bit, where do you start? And pick something. Pick a process. Now, how do you pick a process? Well, you have these conversations with him in the room or not, but the point is you've got to have them, otherwise
you end up picking a process then about the people. Well, you end up picking a process from the people who shout the loudest, though, don't you?
Can often be the way. You've got to say, OK, well, what are all of the different processes that people are suffering with in the business at the moment? You can either say, OK, yeah, let's take the people who are shouting the loudest, but quite often that will be the higher level management people who have already got BI, the old BI. But actually start to look, OK, what other processes are in the list that have a biggest impact on the performance of the business?
Typically, what do those turn up being? Is it the same thing over and over again?
No, there are some common themes, things like process management for... inventory management is a classic one. Every business has something coming in, something happens to it, and it goes out again. That might be a customer, coming in, doing some customer onboarding through different accounts, applications, or it might be a product, it takes more materials in. That process spans different areas in the business. It'll typically have a set of entities within that process that you can get your heads around. That's a good one to pick off. It can have a big impact on the business, but usually if it's something that you can get your head around, you can understand all the different components in it, then that's a good target.
I bet everybody listening to this or watching this can think of a scenario where somebody went, damn it, if I'd have known that 2 weeks ago, or if I'd have known that, within 10 minutes of it happening, we could have done something about that and either made more money or sold more stuff or not sold less stuff because of the problem. An example that we heard of was a call centre which stopped picking up calls or answering calls quickly enough for people that were at the end of their contracts. So that was the reason for it was something like a partner was running a new campaign to attract new customers, and there were lots of people trying to sign up for it. People that were at the end of a contract were phoning up to find out what the options were and all that kind of stuff, and just not getting service. So, and what happened was, I think, in a sort of a retrospective report, it's like, well, this campaign got these many, but at the same time, weirdly enough, we lost all these customers. What on earth's going on? Turns out that, like I said, the people that were calling for a different reason than the campaign weren't getting any service because there weren't enough people on the phones to be able to service the other customers. And if the call centre manager or the team leader or whatever had an alert to say that the system's getting all these calls in but we're not picking them up, they could have quite quickly got another 5 or 10 people and avoided that. So it's those kinds of, and I think probably most people can think of an example of something like that that's going to have happened to them, or perhaps happens regularly. But maybe they don't shout about it because that's simply the sort of the latency or the inertia that they've got used to in terms of, it's part of
their business is always like this.
It's part of the job.
Like
it's a bit rubbish and we muddle through. And I think the argument we're trying to put forward is it doesn't have to be like that, but you've got to identify those things. And is that a process thing? Is it simply an alert? Mm-hmm. So something happens and something gets triggered from here, and somebody gets a little SMS or whatever it is. I think people can come up with those.
Is there a way that the IT department advertises itself by just doing something small and clever?
Yeah, oftentimes if you find something which is particularly high visibility in a business, you can get a lot of benefit out of it as well. So going back to that supplier dashboard that I mentioned, same company, they also wanted something for their CXOs. Now, okay, we mentioned that typically CXOs have already got that sort of information out of the older type systems, but because of their visibility in the business, something that could be very quick and real time, put it up there, get it in front of an important audience, that can often kick off other discussions elsewhere in the business.
So if you've got the scenario that you have in mind, then you can think about, well, what is the kind of information that is associated with that scenario, either that exists and doesn't get sent to somebody, or simply needs generating so that someone can do something about it. And then you get into what we've been talking about, or what you've mentioned a few times, which is the sort of the trust and the single version of the truth thing. And are we risking getting conflicting sort of bits of information if this thing is actually based on, a composite of several different applications in order to get to that answer that guy needs, whatever, around sort of consistency, and then what format is it in? And then, of course, the next thing to think about is, right, okay, in that context, with that sort of information that we've identified as being important, where does it need to get to? In what format? Does it need to be sent through to somebody's mobile device if they're not in an office? Does it need to be sent through to someone's screen? All that kind of stuff. So there's kind of, I think there's 3 levels that you could think about this, starting from the point of view of you've identified something that's tangible that you can get your arms around.
Here's a question that's popped up. The problem that a lot of data that's in businesses at the moment is unstructured. You talk very much about SQL Server. I can see how SQL Server and Excel and these sort of things lend themselves to this. When you have to have things like, someone's asking whether you consider searchable email to be sort of workable as a way of providing business intelligence.
Yeah, to me, I've started using a lot when I talk about BI is the concept of BI content. So your reports and your dashboards and your numerical fields, that structured information is, at the end of the day, when you're publishing it out to somebody, it's content. Now, content also means your Word documents, PowerPoint presentations, the emails, that unstructured information. So part of your BI strategy, or part of a big, a major BI project, would or should encompass search for that sort of information as well. So using SharePoint again has a search engine, but there are other technologies out there as well.
But then it becomes passive information, though, doesn't it? You have to go searching it to look for things.
Not necessarily. You know, if in your dashboard, you know, you've got your KPIs up there, something goes red. Well, why not have against that red KPI a search link? Go and search for everything that's relevant to that KPI. And that brings up all of that unstructured information as well. And that might have, there's usually going to be some human intervention there to actually say, okay, well, here's the top results. You can do that with a machine. But of those top results, which is the valid email that really describes why that thing's gone red, you know, then there's always going to be some human intervention.
I'm surprised we got this far without mentioning search, so kudos for the person that brought that up. We're not talking about Google here. We're talking about applying something that can find something, knowing who you are and having a reasonable idea of what you're looking for in the first place, which is a lot different from pointing Google at the internet and saying, find me stuff with the word football in. Because you get everything with the word football in, and 99.999% of it you didn't want to know about. You wanted to know the Huddersfield Town score.
But we're saying it's enough to build in a suggestion of what you should be searching for and to make your internal information available for search.
Yes, absolutely.
That will do the trick.
And that's where search is going. And you guys acquired Fast 18 months ago, or whatever it was, and all right, Fast generally likes to get involved in quite big projects. In my understanding, there are search.
I don't know what that is.
There are search. Oh, it's a search company.
Search technology. You know, the reason that we acquired it is looking at the way that we use SharePoint as a front end for all of this new BI stuff. Actually, SharePoint's also a sensible place to put all those search results. And if you can have one set of search results that includes your unstructured data and your structured reports and spreadsheets and the like.
But there's search widgets and there's search apps. I mean, there's a company out there called Recommend, which involves search in quite specific sort of contextual situations around regulatory compliance in financial services. That's
important,
really specific, exactly. So it goes back to that context word.
Someone's saying predefined queries. Do you need to go that far to do predefined queries?
Absolutely. Why not? That's not going to suit all requirements, but. Imagine if you could have let's just say a lower skilled person or a less senior person with the ability to do a predefined query in a given scenario. So they are led, you know, it's more of a prescriptive thing. They are led to the right answer.
Which, funny, it fits in with this comment, actually. There's a comment that you didn't leave your name, but it's a good comment. Is it the case that IT experts are turning into information conductors? He means it like a conductor, like a band, rather than a bus conductor.
That's a fantastic analogy. Yeah, very much so. You know, getting all of this different information from different sources, different types of information, but getting it to describe or to getting the end result of all of that data into something that has some semblance of organisation. That ultimately becomes something beautiful. It's very cheesy, but yeah, you know, some beautiful music that a conductor conducts.
Hey, it's beautiful when you're sitting in a room talking about it. It's not quite so beautiful when you have to get.
Funnily enough, I think we are approaching that destination from a whole bunch of angles. Even if you think about all the infrastructure that we've got and the fact that this thing that some people call cloud computing is offering us alternatives. Some of the stuff we do today, we might not be doing in our own data centres in the foreseeable future, etc., etc. What's left for IT to do? Well, it's to make sense of the information and to make sure that we're doing the right things with it. So there's always going to be a place for IT doing the stuff on our behalf in our business, regardless of whether the tin it runs on is living somewhere else. So I think we're going towards that. Not that we never were. It's just that there's an acknowledgement, I think. And yes, so I think that's a good observation.
I've moved us on to the last slide now because we've got 5 or 6 minutes left. So I just want to make sure that we get enough time on this, rush it, because there's a couple of things. There's an element here of like what you have to do, but there's also about how do you know it's been successful as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess the to address that what do you do? What are the real sort of places to start? We talked about think big, start small. I think, you know, pick a process that you can get your head around. Don't try and do everything in one go. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that's been really, really successful with a lot of customers I've worked with is developing the idea of a sort of centre of excellence, a group of people, be it, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, a BI steering committee or centre of excellence, that sort of thing. People from different business units and people from IT who have an understanding of what the business needs and an understanding of what technology is available, and can quite often come up with a sort of a decision tree, or we've had them called cookbooks, where somebody from the business comes up with a requirement, and you need to whittle that down. Somebody says, you know what's a real problem is I can't see all this information from supplier X. You whittle that down. Okay, well, what data does that mean? What format should that be displayed in? What's the latency of that data? What should that be? And these decisions all converge to a particular technology or particular style of dashboard or portal, whatever it might be. You know, those sort of decision trees, or we call them cookbooks, you've got a set of ingredients and the requirements, a method to follow, and then some output. Pretty picture of a case.
This is your preferred method for getting to something practical?
Yeah, this is has been a very successful method. You know, something that I think it's...
When people wanted to look up some more about this, where could they look it up? Is there anything specifically Microsoft about this?
Not that comes to mind. It's not a specifically Microsoft thing at all. I mean, the concept of these decision trees, came to us from customers. You know, it was working through this with our customers. Mm-hmm. This has been something that has come from them. Has been a very effective tool.
One of the biggies is to remember that we've been talking about this is not a one-hit thing, and whenever you do make a change. The way that you'll know if it's working is by talking to the people that you were trying to help in the first place, and having a closed loop thing in that regard, so that you can make continuous improvements. We're talking about quite from the point of view of the overall business. We're talking about making small incremental changes, so that people can do better stuff, and that adds up to hopefully a lot of goodness for the business, as opposed to, we've got all this information here, let's get it all out to everybody. That's not what we're talking about either. So we've got to be quite specific, and that does require a longer-term view, built up of, little things.
Yeah, and take an iterative approach to it.
Yeah. So this is one of these things where we start by reassuring people and saying it's not an 18-month project or anything, and then in the end we panic them by saying it's going to go on forever. It's going to go on forever.
This isn't ERP in the 90s with no returns for 3-5 years or whatever. Even though I think I used ERP as a positive example earlier, this isn't a 90s ERP project that we're talking about. No, not in the slightest. I think there's probably some things that people can think about from a supplier point of view as well. Actually. There are lots of suppliers out there that have either very big, full-blown business intelligence suites and business process management suites and all that kind of stuff on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's lots of vendors with search widgets and data cleansing tools and information management and access and security tools. So it's kind of important that no single vendor's view of how this should look starts with their product in the middle, and that defines your approach, because that can skew things
briefly, because we've only got a couple of minutes left. But it strikes me that we're much more at the widget end today. The idea that to be creative about being able to provide useful information to as many people as possible in an easy to understand way, rather than we're not talking so much today about the heavy engineering.
We might be talking about widgetizing a lot of stuff you've got, but that doesn't mean lots of different random pieces of software all over the place. It's about a consistent approach.
Have a look at the way that the whole solution would fit together. Don't say, we need to pick out this little widget and that little widget. What is there potentially already within your business that you can use to compose these new BI applications?
You've got to keep it hygienic, so that's about standards, and it's about integrating with tools and things that you've already got.
OK, very quickly, we've got about a minute left then. First place to start, someone's going to go off and do something right now because they're so enthusiastic. Well, what's it going to be?
Well, from a Microsoft point of view, Microsoft.com/BI is the key starting place for all of our BI information. Go and take a look at the latest wave of products we've just released, a new version of SharePoint. Power Pivot, something I've mentioned very briefly. Have a look at Microsoft.com/BI. That's the core place to start.
You're one plugin.
That might be the how. The what is what specific thing are we going to start? Where are we going to start, or what or who are we going to help? And that's the important thing, because otherwise you may think you're helping somebody and it may be ineffectual or not required. So it's that process or step, or it's that line in the quarterly report that's like, why can't we fix that? Now those things exist. I think people, hopefully, when we said, can you think about that call centre example in the context of your own business? those things exist, and so that's where to start from a what point of view, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. That's all we've got time for. Will, Martin. And thanks very much for all your questions. There's a ton of them today, and some of them were kind of long, so I hope I sort of didn't misrepresent them for you. Thanks very much for listening to this. Hope it's been useful. You got a feedback form, so you can tell us if it has. And we'll be back soon with another Regcast, so until then, goodbye.